Hey everybody, this is Alzorath, and welcome back to another episode of Deck Breakdown. Now, for the next couple weeks, I'm going to be covering the expansion that's currently on the test server. It's 150 cards, so it's going to take a few episodes to cover, and I decided to break it down into deck concepts rather than specific decks that could be built from this, because there's still going to be some balance changes and some essentially fixes to bugs and other things that are going to change how the decks play. So I can't really give specific decks that are going to work well in, an undecided meta that's going to occur. Now, obviously there's going to be straightforward decks such as the rush decks, the burn decks, the solo decks, and the such. And this expansion makes some heroes more viable than they were in the old expansion. Well, the old series of cards, and obviously 150 cards compared to the original 200 is going to make a big difference in what is able to be done. In this first episode, I'm going to be covering, well, the basics of mill. And this expansion, while it doesn't make mill exceptionally viable, it does bring up the ability to utilize it to an extent, or even hint at possible future expansions which could turn mill into a viable strategy in and of itself. Obviously there's going to be two heroes that focus on mill, and that's the rogue and the elemental. While the elemental is commonly considered the priest counterpart, in this case it's more of the rogue counterpart in terms of removing cards from the opponent. The difference between their type of mill is the rogue tends to focus on the player's hand, whereas the elemental tends to focus on the player's deck. So I see the elemental mill deck basically playing much like the feedback bomb that I posted a while back as just interesting footage. It's an uncommented match, and if I remember, I'll put a link to it down in the description or in an annotation on the video. And I'll also include a link to the test server for you guys wanting to test some of these things out. Now, I'm going to start off by covering a little bit in the elemental end because, well, I honestly prefer seeing the elementals get a little, not the elementals, the shadow players get a little boost, because we all know that in the original set, Shadow was kind of shaky. It wasn't exactly as strong as it could have been. And honestly, as far as mill goes, they're still in that same boat. The elemental mill is blatantly about 80% as effective as the human mill whenever it comes to controlling the field, because, well, the elemental doesn't remove plays from your opponent, it just removes deck. It kind of messes with their tempo, but they didn't know they had that tempo to begin with, so they couldn't plan for it. Whereas the rogue messes with things they were planning in their hand. Elemental has a couple things that sync up into a combination that can help it kind of sustain itself, and has some interesting combinations available to it, such as Infinity Core and the use of Twisted Familiars, allowing you to utilize the Twisted Familiars to basically make mini feedbacks and heal yourself at the same time. And you can also use them for energy discharges to wipe the field. So you only really need that small little batch of allies, because the elemental's constantly bringing things back into its deck, bringing allies back into its deck, which is something the rogue mill deck can't do. So the rogue will need more allies to control the field, or more abilities. Now, as far as elemental abilities specifically for mill, you have, well, Temporal Disturbance, which if a hero ends up with shadow energy, the top card of their deck is discarded. Now, this actually can cause damage. If the opponent is out of cards in their deck, it will deal 1 damage instead of forcing a discard of something that isn't there, which is very useful, and it helps accelerate the effect of the feedback Santa loop. I've only had this be successful a limited amount of times on the test server, so it's not really a viable strategy in and of itself, especially in the lower end where you run into bigger decks where you have to hold out for longer and you just simply can't. Elementals do gain some things that help them dig for these cards, though, such as the Antimatter, which is a 2-card draw, unilateral, but you have to discard one of them. So you're digging faster, but you're having to rely on the Eternal Renewal to bring things back into your deck. And also Infinity Core and several other things. Synchronicity is kind of an interesting little card. You probably won't see it used too much in a mill deck, but it allows for board control if you use fat allies in your mill deck. There's a couple other things you can do, but honestly, those are the kind of core things as far as that goes. There's a few neutral abilities that both of them can use, which is the Scythe of Fate, which all heroes can use to an extent. I actually see it kind of popping up, possibly even in mage decks, due to a certain card that's in there that some people are complaining is overpowered. Maybe. We might see that pop up there. One that I see really popping up in some of these decks is possibly Dark Revelations, which is for the next 3 turns, all opponents play with the top of their deck revealed, and for 2 shadow energy, you can force them to discard that card. It's temporary, but this uses up shadow energy, which prevents you from having to discard as many of your own cards to your mill, which is actually kind of nice. Now, as far as other things, there's not really anything that's going to be staple. Aldmore Conduit could see a place in the elemental one more than the rogue one, because for 1 shadow energy, you draw a card. This allows the opponent to kind of opt out of discarding a card at the end of the turn, but drawing it to their hand. But that's one more card out of their deck. So they're basically accelerating their own deck removal, although it allows them to kind of play into their own choices rather than you just forcing it out of their hand. So it's there. Now, there's not much else you can really do as far as elemental, but I'm going to move on to a little bit of a focus on the rogue real quick and why I think it's superior, because, well, it targets on the hand, but also there's a draw engine associated with removing things from the hands on the rogue, and that is illicit information. Whenever you have this attached to your hero, whenever an opponent discards a card from their hand to their graveyard, you draw a card. Now, you have Serena's ability, which causes a discard. You have sorry, a little bit of cotton mouth right there. You have Lyra Blackrose, that whenever an opponent uses shadow energy while she's in play, they have to discard a random card from their hand. You have let's see. I'm looking for the name of it. Oh, jeez. Well, I'm forgetting the name of it. Oh, there it is. Payday. For the next 2 turns, opponents who start their turn with 4 or more cards in their hand discard 1 card at random. This is another one that's from their hand. You have a bunch of control cards to keep things that your opponent does play out of the way, such as Agent Rex, which you steal an artifact for 3 resources, and Agent Rex comes back into your deck, which is kind of nice. You have Smokescreen to deal with allies, basically slowing them down. In my mind, it's kind of the equivalent of using Fog in Magic the Gathering. You have Procured and Restored, which can pull an item from any graveyard into your hand. You have all these things that basically allow the rogue to interact with the graveyard. You have things that allow them to pull things from your opponent. You have things that force the opponent to discard a card from their hand, which ruins tempo. I mean, you're looking at your hand, you're thinking, oh, this is what I'm going to do over the next 2 or 3 turns. Ideally, you are. Or at least you should be. And then the rogue can go in and just totally mess with that, thanks to so many things basically forcing you to discard. And that's why I see the Rogue is more effective. I'm going to be doing some tests on some specific builds pretty soon for the Rogue. I've already been doing some tests for the Elementals. And with the Elementals, I find Zaladar better. For the Rogues, I see Serena being better for the discard aspect, whereas I see Lance being better utilizing the Rogue control that has been introduced. Especially Silent Strike. That's an interesting effect. You draw a card whenever you cast it, and that ally has stealth and ambush until the start of your next turn, which is really nice. Sorry about that. But yeah, I'll come back to you guys with more information on that one probably in the future. I just wanted to get something out to say, yeah, I'm going to be covering this. And that's the thing that's spurring my interest right now. And that I will be covering different kind of decks. And I'll be looking at options. And if you guys see anything interesting that you'd like me to look at for future episodes covering Dark Prophecies before its release, be sure to post in the comments below, and I'll look into it and I'll see what I can come up with and see what kind of combinations could be useful to that kind of deck. And yeah, I see this being a really good set for encouraging more combo decks, which is essentially the counter to the fatty decks, which actually combo decks can be a counter to anything, but there's the whole circle of counters. I'm forgetting the exact order right now because I'm in a little bit of a rush. I'm recording this before heading to work, so yeah, I've just had the urge to get this out. But yeah, I'll see you guys next time. Sorry for the shortness of the episode and a little bit of rambly nature, and I'll be improving that as I get back into the swing of recording these deck breakdowns. But yeah, keep gaming, have fun. Be sure to like, subscribe, definitely comment below with things you'd like to hear about, things you'd like me to go into more detail on. If there's a specific card you'd like to hear more about, maybe I can make a little mini episode over those. And eventually I'll probably go through and cover entire segments of cards detailing what I think each one can really do as far as what things it can match with and interact with. But yeah. This has been another episode of Deck Breakdown. My name's Alzorath. Keep gaming, have fun, peace out. See you next time.